Now, I was going to do, and I had full plans to do it up until yesterday. I'm going to do a Firewall about the moon landing conspiracies. Because I watched a little bit of, what's his name? I'm not really going to give him any extra publicity. Not that he needs it. He's got more viewers than I do. But let's just refer to him as O and B. No, wait, that's too obvious. How about O. Benjamin? I was so stunned at the thinness of the evidence, the thinness of it. I don't know. Did I talk about this last week? I suspect I probably did. I certainly won't go into it all again. But nevertheless, they see they search hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pictures with a magnifying glass, as at least in the old days, literally just looking, and they see some little thing, and this little thing overturns 13 Saturn V launches. And my favorite one is the Sea Rock. There's a picture of a rock. I think it's on 15, I'm not sure. There's a picture of a rock. It's a big frame, maybe it's 14, I don't remember. But down in the corner, because they blow it up, make it look like it's the center of the picture, way down in the corner, there's just a bunch of rocks, and on one of the bigger rocks, if you were to just glance at the picture, if no one had shown it to you, you probably wouldn't even have noticed it. But it's kind of like a letter C, and it's kind of thin and kind of, curly. And the writing is very thin. And so they see this thing that looks like the letter C, so therefore we didn't go to the moon. Because there's a thing on a rock that looks like the letter C, and so therefore 350,000 people lied for half a century, and every single one of them was so terrified of NASA that not one of them ever came forward with any real evidence. Owen said he wouldn't debate me. I didn't see his, apparently did a video on me. Eric says, somebody says that I need to do my research. Yeah, if only I did a little more research on Apollo, I'd know what I was talking about. So they call this thing the Sea Rock. And so I did what I did when I was convinced, for the week I was convinced that Edward de Vere, 16th Earl of Oxford, actually wrote the plays of William Shakespeare. I spent a week believing that. And then I had the intellectual courage to go and look what the other side of the argument was, because I'd heard the Edward de Vere side of the argument. And when I read the William Shakespeare side of the argument, not only did the de Vere case fall apart, but it became immediately clear that it had to be William Shakespeare for any number of reasons. And this is just the fundamental integrity that it takes if you're going to believe something and go out on a limb and say, I go out on a limb and sort of defend it publicly. So back to the Sea Rock. So I took a look at the Sea Rock. I took a look at the story of the Sea Rock. What they claim, now think about this. What they claim is that this sea on a rock is a marker left by the prop department, and that it had overturned and no one had caught it. So I want you to think about this for a second. You've built a set that extends to the horizon. The sky is visible, and there are 360-degree pans. How you pull this off in a studio, I don't know. But just think for a second about how ridiculous this is. First of all, if I were to go over the hill to Universal Studios or Warner Brothers or any other actual movie studio, you will not find the prop rocks labeled with letters to identify them, because a lot of times you want to use the other side of the rock. There are hundreds of rocks in the picture, and if the letter C was used to denote each one of the rocks, then since there are only 26 letters in the alphabet, you really would only have 26 rocks in the shot. Because if you had more than that, you'd have to go to double letters or letters and numbers, which would mean this would be C000 or whatever the case may be. It's not, it's just C. But it gets so much better than that. It gets so much better than that. I took a look at, okay, what is this? What is this C rock? The people who found the C, the smoking gun evidence that we never went to the moon, on this one photo of hundreds of thousands of photos that were taken over all the missions, turns out that the picture that has the C on it was a print. Now, we live in a digital age, but for those of you who may or may not remember this, at the time of photography, before digital imaging, if you wanted to make a copy of a picture, you had to have the negative and you had to make a print of it. The negative was actually the original, and then you would make prints. Well, it turns out that on the original, the C isn't on the rock, which means it was on the print. And the beautiful thing about it is, when you zoom in on the C, it is clearly a hair in the shape of a C. And not only that, you can actually see that the hair is kind of, it's like the color of hair is like kind of brown, a little bit translucent. And you can see it coming off. You can see it's kind of like almost like 3D where it's not lying flat. Somebody who also did a great job of debunking all of this stuff pointed out that the letter C is not a terribly difficult thing to make with something like a hair. It's not like it was the letter Q or R or something. It's just a bend on either end. And this is so easily explained, and yet they hang so much on it. Old what's-his-face, in the space of 10 minutes, the only 10 minutes I could bear to watch of it, he's basically out in the woods talking about how this didn't happen. And during the 10 minutes I watched, he twice referenced the fact that NASA had sent the Dutch a piece of petrified wood when we were supposed to be delivering the moon rocks. Therefore, because the Dutch got a piece of petrified rock when they thought they were getting an Apollo rock, moon rock, the lunar landing never happened. There's your evidence. I'm going to make this video anyway. I'm just not going to make it this week. I'll make it next week. So I looked into the moon rock, and what I'm going to do when I do the Firewall is I'm going to say I'm going to show you in rapid succession 10 moon rock pictures. One of them will be the moon rock that was delivered to the Dutch, presumably by NASA, and see if you can tell which is which. And when you see a picture of the rock that Benjamin claims NASA gave to the Dutch, turned out to be a piece of petrified wood. Well, you know why it turned out to be a piece of petrified wood? Because it was a piece of petrified wood, that's why. I show you 10 pictures of a moon rock, and you will see moon rock, moon rock, moon rock, moon rock, petrified wood, moon rock, moon rock, moon rock, moon rock, moon rock. It is so clearly not a moon rock. It's brown. It's not, it doesn't even look like a rock. It looks like a piece of wood. So the fact that NASA is able to intimidate through threat of murder 375,000 people, 13 Saturn V's go off the pad, not to mention hundreds of other Titans and Atlases and all the rest of it, but 13 Saturn V's with 7 million pounds of thrust lift off in front of millions and millions of people live, and I saw it go up live myself. Unless, of course, I was a member of the conspiracy H10, in which case I don't remember what they paid me with, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't fear of death, because I would have laughed at somebody if they told me that. But here you go. So I dug a little tiny bit deeper. Say a little bit deeper. I mean, I dug 2 minutes deeper, right? Not like I spent 2 days. I spent 2 minutes deeper. And what I found was that there were these 2 Dutch artists in 2007 who had put together a gag display some kind of political statement they were making, and they had put this thing in there as an example of the moon rock, and somehow or another it found its way into a Dutch museum. There's no indication that it was ever officially labeled as a moon rock, but I mean, how weak can you give me an example of evidence that would be weaker than that? Because I can't think of anything. So the 13 Saturn V launches, that doesn't count. Because there's a piece of petrified wood that somebody claimed was given by NASA, therefore it never happened. I saw a comment in one of the YouTube streams or something. And somebody said, well, look, Bill, it's obvious it didn't happen. A NASA guy admitted that we didn't go to the moon. So there you go. So let's have a look at that claim. 375,000 people working on the Apollo program over 10 or 11 years. You're telling me there's not one nut in there, but it's even better than that. Because what I want to know is, who was the person who said it? When and where did they say it? What did they say? Because if I know when they said it, what they said, and who said it, then I can find out whether it's true or not. But I haven't seen anybody ever able to deliver on these things. Every now and then you find a guy who might have been, one of the auxiliary hydraulic guys on one of the lifts in the vehicle assembly building. Says we didn't go, but with 350,000 people, I keep getting the number wrong. It's 355,000 people. So you got 350,000 people. One person says, we didn't go, and he worked for NASA, so therefore the moon landing never happened. And if there's 349,999 people that said it did happen, it doesn't matter, because this guy admitted that it didn't happen. When you get to how weak this evidence is, and then just put logic aside, like if this thing actually did happen, why would we go again and risk getting caught a second time and a third time? And why would we have the third time blow up and then a fourth time and then a fifth time? And this time, why would we have a golf cart that allows you to watch live as you transverse on Apollo 17? It was a 12-mile drive. 12-mile drive, live video, dust flying like it's in a vacuum. That's a big studio. Would you have missed it? If you're trying to keep a secret like that, would you have missed, as an American member of the American public, if they'd shown you Apollo 15 and they'd stayed in the same size as Apollo 11, which was inside a baseball diamond? That's how small the area they covered on Apollo 11. If that rover hadn't been on Apollo 15, would the American people have risen up as one and demanded to know what's going on with this fraud? Because where's the moon buggy that we were never told about that we didn't see? But the biggest argument of all is the simplest one of all. And that's this. The claim is that you were able to convince 350,000 people, even on their deathbeds, that if you told the secret, you would be killed. Now, among those people that would be killed are test pilots who had a 25% chance of being killed on every mission they did when they were flying new aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base. These are the most fearless people in the world. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that NASA had something so compelling that Neil Armstrong spent his entire life knowing that he wasn't the first man on the moon, but afraid to say so because he was afraid of what NASA or the government would do to himself or his family. Let's just say that's true. Just say it's true. If Neil Armstrong was convinced that NASA or the government was ruthless enough to not only kill him, but undoubtedly kill his family or whatever else that level of coercion would take, then my question is, if NASA is ready to murder Neil Armstrong so that the secret doesn't get out, then how come this nut job sitting out in the middle of a forest gets to talk about it for hours and hours and hours? Why isn't he just bumped off? We would never have heard of him. Oh, and who? Why is it that they claim that it's just raw fear that keeps these secrets in, but we have the secrets and we're going to show them to you, and you're going to bring us the truth of all of this? Congratulations, what a big frickin' hero you are. But the fact that you're not afraid to tell us about this conspiracy is an indication that you have no fear of being assassinated, which means that people much braver than you also don't have any fear of it. In other words, if every single person was kept to a code of silence because of fear of death, why the hell have I even seen a video of you talking about any of this stuff? Why? Why have I seen it? Why? Why are any of you conspiracy people alive if that's the case? I'm waiting for an answer. I'm serious as I can be. He's out there in the middle of the forest. Seems like a pretty easy shot, actually, if it turns out that you're a government assassination squad designed to make sure that nobody but you reveals the actual situation to the rest of the planet. See, when you're dealing with Owen Benjamin, and I was never going to, and I'm going to do this rebuttal video, and it's not for him. I know I'm not going to convince him. The guy's lost his mind. And the reason I say he's lost his mind rather than disagreeing with me, which is not the same thing, is because in one of these videos, probably in a couple of the videos, he says that the moon doesn't exist. There is no moon. It can't be a moon. There can't be. It can't be a three-dimensional object because three-dimensional objects don't reflect light evenly across the surface of the object. So therefore, the moon is not a three-dimensional object. It's a two-dimensional object. Where do you go from there? I mean, where do I go from there? Forget about where he goes from there. Where am I supposed to go? If I'm going to defend the moon landing, which would have been a piece of cake in a debate, and as we demolish the evidence, it's not even evidence. It's just just trivia, this chaff. If you are able to continue to knock down those things, and if they keep moving the goalposts to the degree where you are now forced to say that there is no moon, that the moon as we know it doesn't exist, that the moon is a sphere that orbits the Earth doesn't exist, if you're willing to go that far, rather than admit you're wrong, then you're mentally ill. You're just clinically paranoid. Something really, 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 really wrong with you. And the fact that I haven't seen his video, I probably won't watch it, but the fact that he has already preemptively said he's not going to debate me doesn't surprise me, because not only am I capable of demolishing whatever evidence as such as it is that they're ready to present, if I was to debate the moon landing, I would go past defense and I would go on offense. And what I mean by offense is this. Either the moon landing happened or it didn't. I think it did. And I've just spent 4.5, 5 hours giving you the most condensed version of how this happened, from a bottle rocket to the moon landing with no breaks in between. And that is my evidence that it happened. Now, either it happened or it didn't. It can't be another option. There aren't 7 choices here. Either something happened, like we landed on the moon, or it didn't happen. Right? Okay, so if it either happened or it didn't happen, I've presented my evidence that it happened. Now, what I want from you is I don't just want evidence that my story isn't true. You have to tell me what happened. You have to tell me what happened based on your evidence. Well, we faked it. That's not an answer. Faked it by who? How did they fake it? Who did they use to fake it? If all of this stuff is top secret, then how did they do a 360-degree pan on the moon and not see anybody behind a camera? How do you fake the dust? you don't just get to say, I see a hair on a print of a rock, therefore this didn't happen. See, there's the evidence. And then not be able to explain how you would make this fraud happen. And one of my favorite things about this, this is like gaining traction lately because the whole world is losing its mind. One of the things that, I want to get to tidally locked. That's interesting too. One of the things that's so interesting now is you hear people saying they hired Stanley Kubrick to fake the moon landing. And this is the one I love. It's not the strongest argument, but I just love it. Because if they hired Stanley Kubrick to fake the moon landing in 1969, they did it because of his skill in faking the moon landing in 1968 when 2001: A Space Odyssey came out. But the moon in 2001: A Space Odyssey looks nothing like the moon. Nothing like the moon. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the Orion lands, there's a big puff of dust. There is no wind, there is no air. So you're asking me to believe that Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing when the year before he spent every dime in Hollywood and the best scientific minds on the planet, including Arthur C. Clarke, to try and convince people for the sake of the entertainment value of 2001 that they had faked the moon landing, and the moon looks nothing like the real moon. Nothing like. It's all sharp and craggy. That was what we thought a real possibility was. And if you want to say, well, that in the next year they would have gotten it right because they knew what the moon looks like. Well, they knew what the moon looks like because they went to the moon. Where do you draw the line on this? Some people are willing to admit that the Saturn V's actually launched and all the rest of it, and then they just stayed in Earth orbit. Okay. So why is it, again, that we're doing this giant fraud and ready to kill hundreds of thousands of people and twist all their arms? What's the purpose, again? To beat the Soviets. Okay. So your story is that we built a Saturn V rocket capable of 7.5 million pounds of thrust to lift a 365-foot rocket, including all of the hardware, into Earth orbit, which is 98% of the total energy needed to go to the moon and back. We did that. But when we said we went to the moon, that part we faked. That didn't happen. Because that's impossible somehow. Okay? And we did all this to beat the Soviets? Right. I am a bit curious then why the Soviets, who have, as we do, over-the-horizon radars and deep space radars, why did the Soviet Union not announce to the world, showing radar tracks, saying the Apollo 11 mission is in Earth orbit? Here's the radar data. They didn't go to the moon. They're still up there. You can see it on our radar. You can see it on virtually any military radar in the world. Because then you realize that the real genius of the conspiracy is that this moon landing conspiracy happened so that we could defeat the Soviets. And the Soviets were in on the conspiracy. What do you say? And what do you say? The thing I want to point out in this video is really this. There have been lies about the moon landing and hoaxes, and they've been in place since the moon landing happened, and the American people have been lied to, intentionally lied to, about the moon landing. There's no question about it. But the people who are doing the lying are not the astronauts, and I can give you two really, really, really solid examples of this. One piece of razor-sharp evidence that the moon landing never happened is there's a picture of Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, and they're in the quarantine unit. They've just come back from wherever they were hidden, Earth orbit or some hangar out in Area 51 or whatever other magic things you want to put in the world. So anyway, here they are returning to Earth triumphantly after their fake moon landing. And they're in the quarantine in the it's like an Airstream trailer with a big window on the side. And they're all looking very serious, very depressed, very, very, very solemn. And this, yeah, it's a good idea, Martin, about taking conspiracy theories. And this picture of the three men looking so guilty and so depressed at the fact that they realize now, finally, that they've just told the biggest lie in history is evidence that we didn't go to the moon. Well, that's the picture that they show to make the argument. But it's a cropped picture. Because the exact same picture, and you can tell because the expressions are exactly the same, if you look at the original picture, what they cropped out of frame was important. Because it was Richard Nixon, just on the other side of the glass. He's cropped out of the picture. And all three of these men are listening to the President of the United States, who's 6 inches away from their nose, as he makes a speech about something. And for some reason, these three men didn't think it was appropriate to be laughing uproariously and slapping each other on the back when Nixon's making his speech. But the second Nixon is finished making his speech, either he makes a joke or somebody makes a joke, and the next frame is all of them laughing uproariously. Now that is a lie. These people were too depressed because of what, that's a lie. It's a lie. Somebody cropped the photo. Somebody knew that there was a frame after that photo that showed them happy. So when you say that's evidence that it didn't happen, you're lying. It's not just that you're wrong. You're lying. You're lying. Now, some of these things are real simple and some of them are not so difficult. But if you're going to go out on a limb and say this never happened, you could at least do enough fundamental frickin' research to look into some of these things. And my favorite one of all, my favorite one of all, is actually what I had always considered to be their best evidence, even though it's still pretty weak. And that's the Van Allen belts. They talk about the Van Allen radiation belts like they're the belts of Jupiter. They're not. We didn't even know they were there until we flew through them. Okay, so they are an area of increased radiation, true, but it's not the killer radiation that they claim it is. But forget that. Let's say it's a death zone. Okay, now stick around because this advanced, almost impossible to understand explanation of this Van Allen belt evidence is going to take us 20 or 30 seconds to really understand. The Van Allen belts are created by the Earth's magnetic field. The Earth's magnetic pole is close to the geographical North Pole, but not quite. It's offset a couple of degrees, so the Earth spins around its axis, and the magnetic axis is off just a little bit. Essentially, it's the same. That means that the magnetic fields that create the Van Allen belts extend outward from the equator. Everybody with me so far? The equator, the middle of the planet, inner ring, which is where most of the radiation is, larger outer belt, which is larger in area, but much, much weaker. So the argument is, if we're going to go from the Earth to the moon, we have to go through the inner ring, and then we have to go through the outer ring to get to the moon. And that would be true if it were true. That would be true if the Earth was 100% vertical, that there was no axial tilt to the Earth. In other words, if the Earth had zero axial tilt and all of these orbital planes were flat, then you would have to go through the Van Allen belts to get to the moon. And if everything was flat, perfectly on the same plane, we would have a solar eclipse once a month at every new moon, and we would have a lunar eclipse once a month at every full moon. But we don't have lunar and solar eclipses at every new moon and full moon. The solar eclipse is exceedingly rare, and the lunar eclipse is a little less rare because it's throwing a bigger shadow. I'll get to that in a second. But the reason that we don't have an eclipse every month is because the Earth is tilted 23 degrees to the plane of the orbit of the sun. The moon's orbit is also inclined, and it's another 5 degrees off. So basically what I'm telling you is the Van Allen radiation belts, which extend out from the equator, you would have to fly through the belts if you were to launch during those 1 or 2 days when the direct path to the moon is where the orbital plane of the moon is crossing the Earth's equator, which is where the belts are. Because 25 of those other 30 days of a month, you are flying over the belts or under them because the belts are level to the Earth, let's say, and the moon's orbit is inclined. Or if you prefer to think of it that way, that's fine. You fly over them, you fly under them, and it turns out that when you do that to maximize your trip and minimize your exposure, you still do get a little extra radiation. The outer belts are so big that you do nick the outer belts. And What is that fatal dose of radiation? I've heard people say that going through the Van Allen belts would nuke them as if they were in a microwave, which is an interesting argument because a microwave doesn't emit any nuclear radiation. If you're going to tell me that something's going to be nuked like you put them in a microwave, I would then ask you, well, what's the radiation level of a microwave? So we can compare this data and this claim of yours. In other words, if flying through the Van Allen belts gives you so much radiation that it's the equivalent of being put in a microwave for 60 seconds, okay. But microwaves don't emit radiation. They emit electromagnetic energy, not radiation in the sense that we're talking about, not particles that destroy cells. You're telling me that going through the Van Allen belts means they'll be more irradiated than they would be if they were put in a machine that doesn't emit any radiation. But we all know what they're saying. So, how much radiation did they take? Well, as it turns out, the Van Allen belts around the Earth are actual, real things. And because they're real things, they can be interrogated through science. Science can ask questions and get answers from things that are real. That's what science is very, very good at. So while you may not be able to tell me what the radiation levels in the Van Allen belts are, which is your entire argument, I can tell you what the radiation levels in the Van Allen belt are. And I can tell you that if you fly a mission that is either going to put you most over or under the trip to the moon, there'll be a time every month, there'll be a time when there's a maximum inclination, there'll be a time when there's a minimum inclination, and 2 times when you have to go through the belts to get to the moon. That happens every month on an inclined orbit. If you decide to minimize the radiation exposure for your astronauts, which seems like a pretty good idea to me, then it is possible to determine how much radiation you would have to take if you could go directly to the moon during the least disadvantaged moment. You still go through a little bit of the outer belts, and you do pick up some radiation. And the amount of radiation is well known, so here it comes. Every single year, the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, which, like EPA and Food and Drug Administration, all the rest of it, are extraordinarily conservative and overly cautious organizations. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has determined, and OSHA and all the rest, there are laws, let's put it that way, American laws, that limit the amount of radiation that a worker can take. This would be people who work in nuclear plants, it would be people who work with medical technology, and it would be flight crews and flight attendants who spend a fair amount of their time up above most of the atmosphere. So there is a legal limit to how much radiation you can take in a year. And that limit is 5 rem, 5 Roentgen equivalent MEMS. It's a measure of dose. It's a dose of radiation. 5 rem every year is the maximum that a person can take if you're working in a nuclear power plant. Beyond that, the facility has to be evacuated. 5 rem every year. The Apollo astronauts, in their transit above and below the Van Allen belts, nicked the outer edge of the weaker outer belt because it is so large, and they added an additional 1.5 rem to their total exposure dose for that year, which means that they got about 1/3 of what every single worker in the nuclear industry is allowed to get every single year. And those are the numbers. And you don't get to argue and say, no, it would have killed them. I give you data. I can give you the number. I give you RADs. I can give you REMs. I can give you sieverts. I can give you radiation figures measured from satellites and probes that have been there. And I can tell you to the decimal point how much radiation is out there. And I can tell you when they went to the moon, they took an additional 1/3 of a year of what nuclear workers are allowed to take every year. But this business about flying over and under the Van Allen belts, being omitted, is just lying. And if you don't know that in advance, you should, if you're going to go out and make this your entire mission in life. So this leaves us with the ultimate question about not just. I don't know if 1.5. I'd be willing to bet you that somebody who had a booth in Grand Central Station takes more than a 1.5 rem extra radiation, because the granite in Grand Central Station is pretty radioactive stuff. I don't know how much I took when I had my. Does anybody in the comment section know? We've got such bright people here. Can anybody have a rough idea what my radiation dosage in REM would have been when I had that radioactive tracer dye heart examination? Anybody able to do the math for me on that? I would like to know how much REM that procedure gave me. So if somebody could just, if you can find out, do the math on that just approximately, I'd be very curious to know what that number is. Because I watched them pump that radio. It's a billion rem. I hadn't realized, Martin. Thank you. It's a billion rem, and I took a billion rem. Oh, John Pershing, he's much more accurate. He's got 9.3437 millibillicils. So here's the thing. If we can't measure the dose of the Van Allen belts, if I can't tell you that this is what the radiation level is, and you tell me it's different, then you and I are disagreeing about reality. I'm not saying that makes me right, but I'm saying we're disagreeing about reality. We don't agree on something that exists. But when I tell you that instrumentation in the belts is giving me my information, and you tell me that that's wrong, that's like telling me that the tree that may be outside your window doesn't exist. Or if it turns out that that happens to be an elm tree, and you say it's a palm tree, and you and I are both standing out there looking at this thing, and it is an elm tree, and I say it's an elm tree because it's an elm tree, and you say it's a palm tree because I'm too stupid to have realized how I've been duped by the elm conspiracy, then you are saying that reality is not measurable, and that the only thing that matters is what is in your personal mind. You personally determine reality for the rest of the world. And now we're on to why people like this are so they're just so bought into the whole thing, because it makes them feel like they're heroes, like they're risking. What are they risking? They're risking a snarky comment on the Stratosphere Lounge. Is that the risk that they're willing to run in order to reveal these terrible truths to the American people? Anyway, if somebody could get that number, that'd be awesome. If they can do it, I just don't know what it is. Anyway, my point is, when you get that far out, when you start saying that, all of this didn't happen, we built a vacuum chamber the size of a county and lit it uniformly and made it into a vacuum and threatened to kill hundreds of thousands of people if that's what it took. And furthermore, we did this several times. If that's what you believe, because somebody has a hair printed on a print, one print, then you have to ask yourself what's causing somebody to do it. Okay, so millisieverts, here we go. Bo Monday. Radiation for CT angiogram ranges from 2 to 7 millisieverts. Well, then, can I get that in REM? I know it's an easy conversion. I just don't remember what it is. 4 to 10 millisieverts. It's going to be, what is that? Is that 4/10 of a REM? So we just, it's always an 8 second delay here. So what it is it's a strong emotional. One REM is 10 millisieverts. Thank you, Bo, but math's not my strong suit, especially when I'm improvising here. What would that dose be in REM? Would it be 0.7 REM? Thank you. On the high end. So that works out. The Apollo astronauts took twice the radiation that I took when I went to have my when I went to have my coronary examination with the radioactive tracer dye. So anyway, I don't know. Sarge says, why does it sound so much like the last show? I don't remember much about the last show. But this, needless to say, is on my mind, and I suspect after next month, after this week rather, it'll change. Anyway, it's that line from Lord of the Rings. It's like they're about to be overrun by the orcs in Helm's Deep, and Theoden says, how can you stand up against such reckless hate? And it's not just hate, it's this identity thing. There is no moon. The moon's not 3D. Umbra and penumbra are just made-up words. They don't exist. I could do it right here with a lamp. I could take a little piece of gum and this lamp and use the wall to show you the difference between an umbra and a penumbra. Anyway, there are people who hear these two or three things and are convinced by it because they never get to hear the other side of the story. I just finished 5 hours of talking about the level of detail in every one of these things. Just the level of detail all the way through to Apollo 7 before you even ride a Saturn V. We're talking about detail that goes back for 10 years. And then, there are times when I think I really shouldn't do it, but I do think that on some level I owe it to people to put something out that it's not. I'm not trying to convince people that the moon landing happened. I need to show people that the people who deny the moon landing are lying to you, that the evidence of that picture is right there in front of your eyes before they crop it. And whether they know it's a lie or whether they're repeating the lie or whether they generated the lie, there it is. I know Dave Big Booty. I know it wasn't a Saturn V. It was a Saturn 1B. However, it was the first launch of an Apollo vehicle into Earth orbit. And I'm just going to have to do this thing. I'm just going to have to get it out of my system. Anyway, all right. Let me see. I didn't really put up a Facebook post except for one saying that we were going to delay it a day. So let me see if I can find the BillWhittle.com page. I can't function without Scotty Ott. You don't know what I'm doing. Shows by date built on the right AesopsRetreat Lounge. Oh, hang on. This could be it. That's the last entry. Is it here? Oh, I don't have permission to view the content. Allow me to log in. Hang on now. Hey there, Scott. There are no new questions on the little.com. You might want to look at last week, anything you missed. I will do that. Thank you. Who's little.com? All right, I've logged in now. Scott here shows up he shows up like Angel Summoner and the BMX Bandit. Let's see. Yeah, I'm still pretty pretty jazzed about all this stuff.